This Backyard Productions video is about putting together a simple tarp shelter and building a warming fire lay for the front of that shelter. It's a concept video rather than an absolute instructional, and we will hope that you will take the concepts that you see here and build on them, tweak them, modify them as it suits you, and try new things. We see so many scouts that spend their overnights in a cabin or a nice wooden lean-to that someone else has built, or even a tent. And we hope that this will be a challenge for those scouts to use their own creative talents and scouting skills to build their own overnight accommodation.
Well, we're back again, Scouts and Scouters. We're back here at the park, and we're going to be working on building a shelter that's basically for all seasons. And building one is going to challenge all your scouting skills. And we'll be looking at the equipment necessary and how to lay out that equipment and do the actual building of the shelter. Okay, basically we have most of the equipment here that we're going to need to put up our tarp and also build our fire. Right here we have a 8x10 tarp. That's going to be for our shelter. Over here we have a cloth, a ground cloth, that we're going to use underneath that tarp so that you can set your sleeping bag on or whatever it is you're going to be sleeping on. We're going to need some cord. So we have cord here, a big ball of cord. We're going to need some stakes to stake down our tarp. We need some clothespins for a specific reason to actually put down our, if we look here, our plastic drop cloth. We'll explain more to that later. But we have a plastic drop cloth. In order to secure it to our tarp, we're going to be needing to use some sort of clip. And we're going to be using, at this point, we're going to be using regular clothespins. For our fire, we're going to need a number of things. Some of the tools we're going to need are going to be a shovel, a hatchet, perhaps a saw, a hammer. We're going to need gloves to protect ourselves. We have some kindling tinder here and some fuel. We're going to need 3 logs for the type of fire we're going to build, which is going to be called a long fire, and it's normally a long-lasting, anywhere from 5, 6, 7 hours, so that you don't have to tend it once you get it started. So we have 3 logs here. Two logs are 3 inches round, about 3.5, 4 feet long, and another log a little bit smaller. But we need 3 logs, and we'll show you when we actually build our fire, construct our fire lay. You'll be able to see how we utilize that. Here, of course, the tinder. This is bark from the birch tree, which is outstanding for tinder. So that's basically all the material we're going to need for our, plus I have 2 poles here. I have a pole in my hand and I have another pole here, and that's going to be used for setting up our fire protector with aluminum foil. And I don't have the aluminum foil here, but we're going to be utilizing aluminum foil for a reflector for the fire. One of the first things we need to do is find a spot for our shelter. And if you look here, we're going to find a suspension shelter between 2 trees with a ridge line between those 2 trees. So once we've looked around, we find an area that we have our tree here and a tree over here, and it's about the distance apart that we need. What we need to do is sort of clean up the area underneath where the shelter is going to be built. So we'll pick up any large logs, clear out those logs. Whoops, that's good enough. Make sure it's out of the way. Here's a stick we have to get rid of. Okay, once we've got basically an area for our shelter, we have some more that we can get over here, get rid of. We'll keep these leaves because these leaves are going to give us some things that to keep us warm when we build the shelter, to keep us warm on the ground. So we're going to leave those right there. So the first thing we're going to do is build a ridge line. Okay, we've got our spot and we've taken our tarp and laid it on the ground. This is where we're going to have our shelter. First thing we need to do is establish a ridge line to hold the front end of the tarp up. So we come over here, put a line in about the height that we need. And then we pass the end of the line through each of the rings on the tarp. Oops. So now we've strung our line through each of the rings on the front edge of the tarp. We then tie our ridge line at the same height from the other side. Get it as tight as we can. Get it as tight as we can. And I'm tying a taut line hitch so that we can make adjustments as we go. Right now, now the next thing we need to do is run a line from here to the tree to hold that edge taut. Okay, we'll do the same thing on this end. String a line through the tarp, 2 half hitches, and then swing it around the tree. Now a couple of things you can do. You can use a taut line hitch, which is what I'm going to tie right here. I'm going to tie a taut line. That'll give us the ability to tighten it as we need it. So I now have my taut line. The tarp is strung nice and tight. Okay, once we have the front ridge line up, what we need to do is stake the back pieces back in the back end. We stake those down. You can use your foot, use a knife, whatever you want to use. We come over to this far side and stake it in. And then we have 2 more here. So what we'll do is put 2 more stakes in for safety. Make sure we have a nice down stake. Now you'll notice that we may have a little bit of problem here. Once we put these stakes in, we may have to make an adjustment with the corner stake to get that set up. So we can pull this one out again and make sure it's taut exactly where we want it. So now, as you look at the tarp, it is nice and solid. You have a nice tarp layout. One of the things we've got with us is a space blanket. And hopefully each scout can get one of these. Basically, we're going to place it underneath the tarp with the silver side up. Okay, it's a little windy here, so what we ended up doing once we put our space blanket down, we cut a couple of small logs to hold the corners down so it wouldn't blow away while we're setting up the rest of this demonstration. Okay, right now as you look at this, we have a pretty nice place to stay on a nice warm summer day at a camp out without any problems. But let's suppose we're in a wintry type situation where it's pretty cold out here. So we can utilize this painting drop cloth, and we're going to make this into a sort of like a sunroom, if you want to call it that, a sunroom for scouting, and we'll get that temperature, keep the temperatures in while we're staying there. Okay, now you've seen we've taken plastic, the drop cloth for the painting drop cloth. We've placed it over and in front of, over the back and over the sides of the lean-to. And we used clothespins actually, clothespins to hold the tarp to the top of the ridge line. We use logs, like huge logs to hold the bottom of the tarp down, and also logs on the side. So right now we have a nice enclosed sunroom for camping in cold weather. Okay, well, we needed to clear out the area in front where we're going to build our fire. We still have a little bit over here that we need to get further away from our fire lay. So we're going to take our shovel and we're going to move some of these leaves further away from where we're going to be building our fire. Okay, we have our shelter in front of us. Now we need to build a fire. A long fire, what we call a long fire, approximately 3 feet away from the front of the shelter, so we don't have to worry about sparks or setting the shelter on fire. So at that point, right over here is where I'm going to be digging a trench, and that's about 3 feet from the shelter. And it's going to be about the length of the 3 logs that I have right here. These are going to be the logs we're going to be using for our long fire. You can make them longer. The longer and thicker they are, is going to be the longer they will last burning. Right now we have these 3 will probably last anywhere from 3 hours, 3.5 hours or so. If you want to keep an all-night fire, you're going to need to get longer logs, thicker logs, and do the same process that we're going to be showing you with these logs. Okay, now that we've got it cleared up, right in front, about 3 feet away, we're going to start digging a trench for our fire lay. Okay, now we have our logs. What we're going to do is set this up for our fire lay. So we're going to lay 1 log on this side. The other big log on this side, and eventually what we'll end up doing is placing our 3rd log on top of the 3 after we fill in here with our tinder and kindling. Okay, we have our log split here. What we're going to end up doing, I have some Vaseline filled paper towels. We're going to use that as a bottom tinder here. Use some newspaper here for tinder. This will be for our fire starter. The next thing we have to do is to get some tinder and small logs. Okay, let's go. Okay, in my hand I have some silver birch here, some birch lining. And I found a birch tree down, was able to get some of the birch lining. This is some of the best tinder you can get. So we're going to place that in here. Break it off. Well, we've gathered some kindling, so we're going to place that now over our tinder in between the 2 logs. Once we have the tinder and the kindling there, we're going to light this fire. And then we'll be adding on some larger pieces of kindling. But once it starts going, then we will add on some larger pieces of kindling. Okay, so now we're going to light the fire all throughout it. Start at the ends, and then in the middle. Okay, our fire is burning really brightly now, so what we're going to end up doing is putting a little larger kindling on. Get our fire going a little bit higher. Okay, this is our third log, and what I've been doing is cutting pieces so that they have, you can see we have the edges showing. That's gonna start burning once I place it on the fire. Turn it around. Let's do the other side. Okay, the fire's going pretty well now, but we need to get a little bit less of a gap between the two logs that are here, because now we're going to place our center log right in between the two. And if we do this right, that center log will start to burn, and it will get really burning nice and getting a lot of fire, getting a lot of heat. So now the next part we have to do is to build a reflector. We're going to do that right now. You'll notice I have a stick here, and it has pointed end. We have one already inside and on the one side of the fire. We're going to place another one on this side and bang it in. Okay, we have some aluminum foil here. We're going to utilize this to make a reflector behind the fire so that the heat will be reflected into our shelter or onto our shelter. But that's not all it does. If the wind is blowing the smoke into the shelter, this will also provide a draft for the smoke to go straight up rather than going into the shelter. So we're going to be doing that right now. Okay, we've got our reflector up and our fire going pretty well. So let's take a look at what it looks like from the front. And of course, we were going to look, we have a thermometer inside of our shelter. And earlier today when we took pictures of our thermometer, it was 56 degrees.
And here we can see the thermometer under the shelter inside the plastic. So here's a close-up of the thermometer under the shelter and inside the plastic, and it looks like it's reading 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, admittedly, the thermometer is in the sun, which is going to account for some of that increase. But what this shows is that the combination of passive solar heating from the sunlight and the warmth from the fire that's being shed onto the plastic, that the temperature inside the plastic under the tarp is noticeably higher than the temperature outside. Here are some final thoughts on our video demonstration. For the plastic drop cloth, you should use one that's at least 2 mil thick. Anything less than that and the plastic is too fragile and will tend to tear. Also, we used a 9 by 12 drop cloth. For the size of the tarp that we're using, you may want to use something that's wider than 12 feet to ensure that both sides of the tarp are enclosed. If you're going to use aluminum foil for the reflector, the fire reflector, make sure that you get heavy-duty aluminum foil and use some method of securing it to the support poles. Also, rather than aluminum foil, you might want to consider using one of those shiny windshield protectors that folks use in the summer to prevent the inside of their car from getting too hot. We're hoping that you'll take these concepts and these ideas, take them out into the field, and perfect them for your own use and for the kind of camping and shelters that you want to do.